Hi boys and girls, and welcome back to another edition of Snack Time with a Dollop of Read Aloud. Today we're going to continue with reading Number the Stars, with permission granted by Mifflin Publishing for me to be able to share this book with you. Now yesterday when we were reading, we found out some interesting things about Annemarie's life. What was going on now in Nazi-occupied Denmark. How her family always seemed kind of on edge. How Ellen's mom and her friend Ellen always seemed to be kind of skittish or very nervous about what was going on in the community. How on every street corner there were soldiers. Soldiers that weren't the nicest. And as any kid running up and down the streets, as many of us have done throughout our lives, especially our childhood, which you guys are in right now, you run up and down the streets all the time. You run up and down the hallways of school, and I have to make sure to remind you of our proper hallway behavior. So, that being said, Annemarie and Ellen were doing a very normal childhood thing, running down the street, racing, when they encountered the giraffe and the other soldier. Things changed drastically. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to learn a little bit more about what those things are and what life is like now for Annemarie and her friends and family. There was one thing that we did hear a little bit about. We heard about how things that normally were available to them, like coffee or sugar or butter, are no longer available to them. And that's because a lot of those essentials, those really important items that we use every day and truthfully probably take for granted, are now going to the troops and not the Denmark troops, the soldiers of Denmark. They're going to the Nazi soldiers and all of the German troops that have taken over the different countries in Europe. World War II is in full swing, and they are really changing the lives of the people that live in Europe and around the world. So here is where we're going to pick up. Chapter 3, Where is Mrs. Hirsch? Now, after the video today, Mrs. Willis has another little clip for you to watch. It's a brain pop about World War II that'll hopefully give you a little bit more background information. And again, as we're going through, if you have any thoughts or questions or comments that you would like to have further explained, please post in the comment section below. This is definitely a time in the world that we haven't seen before. So there might be some things that are a little bit quirky or unusual that you just need a little bit more explanation for. And I'll be happy to do it. Just make sure that any questions you have put in the comment section below. So here we go. Where is Mrs. Hirsch? Chapter 3. The days of September passed one after the other, much the same. Annemarie and Ellen walked to school together and home again, always taking the longer way, avoiding the tall soldier and his partner. Kirsti dawdled, which means she kind of took her time, just behind them and scampered ahead, but never went out of their sight. The two mothers still had their coffee together in the afternoon. They began to knit mittens as the days grew slightly shorter and the first leaves began to fall from the trees, because another winter was coming. Everyone remembered the last one. There was no fuel now for the homes and apartments in Copenhagen, and winter nights were terribly cold. So like coal or electricity, those were things that were rationed, or they were used very carefully and only if there was an emergency. So they only had a certain amount. If they used it too much or used it too quickly, then they would go without the entire winter. It's kind of like when you get a box of donuts. If you eat all 12 donuts at once, you don't have any donuts for later on in the day. So usually like you'll eat one and then you'll leave the rest and you'll go back for it another time. That's what rationing is, using things carefully. And this is something that people throughout Europe had to do the entire time during the war because things were becoming scarce. Kind of like today with all the coronavirus stuff, toilet paper and paper towels, eggs. These things are going to kind of be like a little bit sparse. So you have to get them when you can see them. Okay? Like other families in their building, the Johansons had opened the old chimney and installed a little stove for use for heat when they could find coal to burn. Mama used it too, sometimes for cooking because electricity was rationed now. At night, they used candles for light. Sometimes Ellen's father, who was a teacher, complained in frustration because he couldn't see in the dim light to mark his papers. Soon, we will have to add another blanket to your bed, Mama said one morning as she and Annemarie tidied the bedroom. Kirsti and I are lucky to have each other for warmth in the winter, Annemarie said. Poor Ellen, she has no sisters. She will have to snuggle in with her Mama and Papa then when it gets cold, Mama said, smiling. I remember when Kirsti slept between you and Papa. She was supposed to stay in her crib, but in the middle of the night she would climb out and get in bed with you, Annemarie said, smoothing the pillows on the bed. Then she hesitated and glanced around at her mother, fearful that she had said something wrong. The thing that would bring a pained look to her mother's face. The days when little Kirsti slept in Mama and Papa's bed were the days when Liesel and Annemarie slept in bed together. But Mama was laughing quietly. I remember too, and sometimes she wet the bed in the middle of the night. I did not, Kirsti said haughtily from the bedroom doorway. I never, ever did that. Mama, still laughing, knelt and kissed Kirsti on the cheek. Time to leave for school, girls, she said. She began to button Kirsti's jacket. Oh, dear, she said suddenly. Look, this button has broken right in half. Annemarie, take Kirsti with you after school to the little shop where Mrs. Hirsch sells threads and buttons. See if you can buy just one and try to match it to the others on her jacket. I will give you a kroner. It shouldn't cost very much. A kroner is like change or money that they use in Denmark. So if your mom would give you like a quarter, it's kind of like the same thing, like a kroner. It's like a coin. But after school, when the girls stopped at the shop, which had been there as long as Annemarie could remember, they found it closed. There was a new padlock on the door and a sign, but the sign was in German. They couldn't read the words. I wonder if Mrs. Hirsch is sick, Annemarie said as they walked away. I saw her Saturday, Ellen said. She was with her husband and their son, and they all looked just fine. Or at least the parents looked fine. The son always looks like a horror, she giggled. Annemarie made a face. The Hirsch family lived in their neighborhood, so they had seen the boy Samuel often. He was a tall teenager with thick glasses, stooped over shoulders, and unruly, messy hair. He rode a bicycle to school, leaning forward and squinting, wrinkling his nose to nudge his glasses into place. His bicycle had wooden wheels, now that rubber tires weren't available, and it creaked and clattered on the street. I couldn't imagine riding a bike with wooden wheels. How bumpy and uncomfortable that must be. I think the Hirsches all went on vacation, Kirsti said. Maybe they went to the seashore. And I suppose there's a big basket of pink frosted cupcakes there too, Annemarie said sarcastically to their sister. Yes, I think there is, Kirsti replied. Annemarie and Ellen changed looks that meant Kirsti is so dumb. No one in Copenhagen had taken a vacation at the seashore since the war began. There were no pink frosted cupcakes. There hadn't been for months. Still, Annemarie thought, looking back at the shop before they turned the corner, where was Mrs. Hirsch? The Hirsch family had gone somewhere. Why else would they close the shop? Mama was troubled when she heard the news. Are you sure? She asked several times. We can find another button someplace, Annemarie reassured her. Or we can take one from the bottom of the jacket and just move it up. It won't show very much. But it didn't seem to be the jacket that worried Mama. Are you sure the sign was written in German? She asked. Maybe you just didn't look at it carefully. Her mother turned away with a distracted look. Mama, it had a swastika on it. She mumbled to herself. Annemarie, watch your sister for a few moments, and begin to peel the potatoes for dinner. I'll be right back. Where are you going? Annemarie asked her mother as she started for the door. I want to talk to Mrs. Rosen. Puzzled, Annemarie watched her mother leave the apartment. She went to the kitchen and opened the door to the cupboard where the potatoes were kept. Every night now, it seemed, that they had potatoes for dinner and very little else. Annemarie was almost asleep when there was a light knock on the bedroom door. Candlelight appeared as the door opened and her mother stepped in. Are you asleep, Annemarie? No, why? Is something wrong? Nothing's wrong, but I'd like you to get up and come into the living room. Peter's here. Papa and I want to talk to you. Annemarie jumped out of bed and Kirsti grunted in her sleep. Peter, she hadn't seen him in so long. There was something frightening about him being here at night. Copenhagen had a curfew. A curfew is a time where everyone has to be in their houses and off the streets. And no citizens were allowed outside after 8. It was very dangerous, she knew, for Peter to visit at this time, but she was delighted that he was here. Though his visits were always hurried, they always seemed secret somehow. In a way, she couldn't quite put her finger on it, but still, it was a treat to see Peter. It brought back memories of a happier time, and her parents loved Peter so much. They thought of him as a son. Barefoot, she ran into the living room and into Peter's arms. He grinned, kissed her cheek, and ruffled her hair. You've grown taller since I last saw you, he told her. You're all legs. Annemarie laughed. I won the girls' foot race last Friday at school, she told him proudly. Where have you been? We've missed you. My work takes me all over, Peter explained. Look, I brought you something. One for Kirsti, too. He reached into his pocket and handed her 2 seashells. Annemarie put the smaller one on the table to save it for her sister. She held the other in both hands, turning it in the light, looking at the ridged, pearly surface. It was so like Peter to bring just the right gift. For your mama and papa, I brought something a little bit more practical. 2 bottles of beer. Mama and Papa smiled and raised their glasses. Papa took a sip and wiped the foam from his lip. Then his face became more serious. Annemarie, he said, Peter tells us that the Germans have issued orders closing many of the stores run by Jews. Jews? Annemarie repeated. Is Mrs. Hirsch Jewish? Is that why the button shop was closed? Why would they have done that? Peter leaned forward. It's their way of tormenting or mistreating them. For some reason, they want to torment Jewish people. It has happened in other countries. They have taken their time here, let us relax a little. But now it seems to be starting. But why the button shop? Why? What harm is a button shop? Mrs. Hirsch is such a nice lady. Even Samuel, though he's a dope, he would never harm anyone. How could he? He can't even see. His glasses are so thick. Then Annemarie thought of something else. If they can't sell buttons, how will they earn a living? Friends will take care of them, Mama said. That's what friends do. Annemarie nodded. Mama was right. Of course, friends and neighbors would go to the home of the Hirsch family. They would take them fish and potatoes, bread and herbs for making tea. Maybe Peter would even bring them a beer. They would be comfortable until their shop was allowed to open again. Then, suddenly, she sat upright, her eyes wide. Mama! Papa! The Rosens are Jewish, too! Her parents nodded, and their face was serious and drawn. I already talked to Sophie Rosen this afternoon after you told me about the button shop. She knows what is happening, but she doesn't think it will affect them, Mama answered. Annemarie thought and understood. She relaxed. Well, Mr. Rosen is a teacher. He doesn't have a shop. They can't close a whole school. She looked at Peter with questions in her eyes. Could they? I think the Rosens will be all right, he said. But you keep an eye on your friend Ellen and stay away from the soldiers. Your mother told me about what happened on Osterbergard. Annemarie shrugged. She had almost forgotten about the incident. It was nothing. They were only bored and looking for someone to talk to, I think. She turned to her father. Papa, do you remember what you heard the boy say to the soldier? That all of Denmark would be the king's bodyguard? Her father smiled. I've never forgotten it, he said. Well, Annemarie said slowly, now I think that all of Denmark must be the bodyguards for the Jews as well. So shall we be, Papa replied. Peter stood. I must go, he said. And you, Longlegs, it's way past your bedtime. He hugged Annemarie again. Later, once more in her bed, beside the warm cocoon of her sister, Annemarie remembered how her father had said 3 years ago that he would die to protect the king. That her mother would die too. And Annemarie, 7 years old, had announced proudly that she would also. Now she was 10, with long legs and no more silly dreams of pink frosted cupcakes. And now she and all the Danes were to be the bodyguard of the Jews. The bodyguard for Ellen. And Ellen's parents, too. Would she die to protect them? Truly? Annemarie was honest enough to admit there in the darkness to herself that she wasn't so sure. For a moment she felt frightened, but she pulled the blanket up higher around her neck and relaxed. It was all imaginary anyways, not real. It was only in fairy tales that people were called upon to be brave and to die for one another, not in real-life Denmark. Oh, there were soldiers, that was true. And the courageous resistance leaders who sometimes lost their lives, that was true too. But ordinary people like the Rosens and the Johansons, Annemarie admitted to herself, snuggling there in the quiet dark, that she was glad to be an ordinary person who would never be called upon for courage. Boys and girls, this is a very important chapter because in this chapter, Annemarie starts to notice things that are going on around her that she really didn't pay attention to before. A store closing isn't something strange, but the reasons that the store has closed is different. So what I want you to do today is I want you to think about, why do you think the store was closed? And do you think Annemarie will have to be brave coming forward? That scene is what they call a foreshadow. And a foreshadow kind of gives you a hint as to what might happen further on in the book. So I'm asking you this question. Do you think Annemarie will have to be brave later on in the book? Tell me yes or no and why you think so. Don't forget, watch the video down below, which is a brain pop all about World War II. Remember, your username is Delran and your password is brain pop. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's reading. I miss you. I love you. Stay safe.